Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our workshop, Business Transition Succession Planning. And we are very fortunate to have Glenn Harrison here with us. Glenn started his journey with Sigma Assessment Systems nearly 2 decades ago, managing a large-scale employee development project for Chrysler that involved over 30,000 management and staff. That's a big undertaking. Over his career, Glenn has worked with 1/3 of the Fortune 500 companies and with every level of government in Canada and the United States. In process, Glenn has had the pleasure of working with thousands of leaders across 49 states, 10 provinces, 1 territory, 107 cities, and 9 countries. So, having said all that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn. We will be using the chat function today. If you have a question anytime during the session, please feel free to put it into the chat and we'll try to address them as we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bonnie, and thank you everyone for taking the time with us this morning. And if you do have any questions or you're not sure, please feel free to jump in because it does save everyone on the call from listening to me for the entire time. It's interesting, every time I listen to the intro, unfortunately, I started my first tour of duty at Sigma was in 1996, which doesn't seem like that long ago. And then when you do quick math in your head, you quickly realize that you're officially old. So I'll turn off my camera and get emotional for a little bit, and then we'll get right back into the session. So what I'm going to be doing, we have, you'll see on your screen, we have the Simple Succession Planning Guide, and it's a really good free resource, and you'll be getting it through this group as part of a larger package that they're putting together for this initiative. But what I wanted to do is go through that. What we've really tried to do with this guide is why we call it Simple Succession Planning, is we don't, if this is this massive undertaking and all this detailed work, you're probably not going to do it. And what we've found over the years is, you know, kind of the old 80-20 rule, where I think you can get most of your benefit from 20% of the work. And what we've tried to do is provide you with some, you know, relatively simple tools, but I think pretty powerful in helping build succession planning within your organization. So we will skip through a few slides. As I said, this will be available. I'll be asking you to do some things during the session, so you won't be stuck listening to me the whole time. But with that, we'll jump right in here. And you'll see, and this, I won't spend, this is going to be different, and especially with this group, a couple of the things that we typically start off with in terms of, because when we talk to organizations, sometimes they'll say, hey, we have, I know who my next in line is, we have succession planning under control, so we're good. But I think it's really good to just take some time. This is a relatively simple questionnaire, and get a sense of, is your succession plan set up for success? So I won't go through every one, but I'll just talk about some of the really important things that we find. Clearly, if there's no executive support, whether it's the owner or the CEO, you're going to find it really difficult to make any progress. And many of you on this call, many of our clients that we talk to, we rarely have to convince them that succession planning is important. Everybody gets that. The difficult thing is getting that momentum and really trying to get it done with the 150 other things that we're doing. So that executive support is really important, just so that we can carve out the time, so that we make sure that it's actually part of our day-to-day. And what we try to do, and hopefully you'll find some of the tools that we'll talk about today, really helps you weave that into your day-to-day versus this big buildup and this big project, and then something that you don't utilize or implement after that. So that executive support is really important. Process, and hopefully one of the things that you'll take from today and with this guide is actually having a proven process. And this goes back again to when we're really busy. If there's not kind of that foundational process in place, it's really easy for succession to sort of go off to the side. And so having that process, I think, really helps weave it into your day-to-day. The other piece too is the process needs to be easy to understand, both to communicate to employees, and so that we can follow along and stay true to what our goals are for succession. And one of the things too, many people, think of succession as finding who's next. In a lot of cases, that's the who's next for the leadership position. We really take a more broad view of succession planning. It's about, I always say, raising the water level of the organization, developing a broader set of individuals for the organization so that we have choice when a position, comes open or not. The other thing is, people think of succession planning as essentially replacing people for retirement. We really view, when succession planning is done properly, we really view it as one of your best, if not the best, employee retention tools that you can possibly have. And I tell the story of one client. We were going through an engagement with them, and they had just lost a really critical and bright employee. And this was it was a significant paying job already, and the individual left for $2,500, which was a small percentage of his salary. And I'll always remember the CEO said, and we'll just call him Joe. Joe didn't leave for the money. Clearly, he left because he didn't see a path. And I think the one thing to keep in mind underlying succession planning is what it does is it provides a path for your employees to say, this is sort of how I'm going to grow within the organization. This is how I see my career going, and it's going to help. It's going to help people want to stay more. And again, depending on your industry, some of those roles, you may have part-time roles. You may have people that would do a certain role earlier in their career, and maybe that's not necessarily as critical. But I think succession can really provide that path and really be a great retention tool for your key people. And those are kind of the two main things I want to focus on. I mean, some of the things that you can look at when you have this document, aside. I think communicating what your succession plan is really important, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the session. I think that accountability is a big piece. At the end of the day, someone needs to own this and keep it driving forward. And as I said, as things become busy and we're getting pulled in different directions, it's easy for succession planning to sort of get put on the back burner or put in the corner. And it is good that somebody is ultimately accountable for keeping it first and foremost, and making sure that we don't forget about it, and not accomplish the things that we want to do. The other thing too here is kind of the long game. When we're thinking of succession planning, as I mentioned at the start of this, many see succession as finding out who's next. All of you on this call may have somebody in mind. If we were talking about your role, may have somebody in mind already that would move into your position should you leave, should you retire. However, what we find is two things. Number one, and I always say to you, if you're thinking of your own role, how does your role look different today than 5 years ago? How do you think your role is going to look different 5 years from now? And I think just keeping the future of the organization, the needs of the organization in mind when we're thinking about succession, because we're typically not thinking about succession for today. We're thinking about building choice for the organization so that we have, hopefully multiple people that can move into a specific role in the future, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, etc. So we always really want to be keeping the future and trying to think of whether it's strategy, whether the industry is going in a certain direction, and how does that look in terms of what our talent needs are going to be. Any questions? Just I know that this is more just kind of getting the brain working, but any questions or anything glaring from this slide that maybe you have a specific challenge with? I'll take the silence as a no, but certainly please feel free to jump in with questions or in the question panel or the chat. So one of the things that I talked about, and I think is really, really important, and I think this is important in anything, I'm a big believer in process in pretty much everything that we do, and having that structure, I think, really ensures that we're doing things consistently and that we can keep making progress when things get busy. So the process is really, really important. And what we'll do today is take you through that process. Our process, I don't think it's really dramatically different than many others out there. I think what's different with ours is specifically the tools that we have within those. But essentially, the first and I think really key piece is identify critical roles. In a perfect world, you would have a succession plan in place for every individual at the organization, from leadership to sole contributor. That's not realistic. And so what we always say, even when clients come to us and they say, we want to go, we want to be a mature organization from a succession planning perspective, and we want to be there yesterday. Trying to do too much at once, as you can all appreciate on the call, is really setting your succession process up for failure. So what we always, and we'll get you to do that in a minute, is really identify a place to focus. So where are you going to start? And it's really about understanding what are those critical or what are those linchpin roles, because succession is really about mitigating risk. Succession is also about the sustainability of your organization. So what are those roles that if someone left tomorrow, that would really cause some pain within the organization? And I'll mention this when we go into that worksheet, but it's not always, and I would say with organizations, even when we come in and work with the executive team, there's typically an individual contributor, so somebody that without a team, without management responsibilities, that pretty much everything in the organization would flow through in some form or another. We have Sharon, who's one of my staff, is basically, we always talk that she is the linchpin of the organization, and so much goes through her. She has so much organizational knowledge. She's now moving into management roles and broadening that role, but we always joke with her that she's not allowed to take vacation because she's so valuable to the organization. And then her maybe not so funny joke coming back is that she wants more money. But again, don't think of it just in terms of leadership positions. And you'll see when we go into the worksheet that it's really about where are the risks within the organization that if we were have to replace someone, kind of the biggest negative impact. The next piece that we'll go into is building success profiles. So once you've identified that role or those roles, is really understanding what's important for success, hence why we call it a success profile. The important piece of this is going to inform your hiring. This is going to inform when you're, I always say, it helps you understand the talent that you need. And what it also creates is, I always say, a target. So if you're developing people for a specific role, you actually have something that you're developing towards. So that success profile is important on multiple different levels. Every time we talk, that our process, we've had this process for probably 10 or 15 years. We've tweaked it a little bit. The nominate successors is not typically, and the name of it is maybe not as accurate as it could be. The idea of this is what we want to do is we've identified the role, then we want to identify what group of people are we going to spend time and invest in to make sure that that we have some redundancy in place for those critical roles. So we'll go into that in a little more detail. And then the second half of the session today, we'll talk about basically an objective way to assess development needs. And so the success profiles is identifying the talent we need. So what do we need? The assessing development needs and nominate successors collectively is really assessing and letting us know the talent we have. Once we understand the gap between those two, that really drives the developed talent piece. And then finally, we want to measure progress. We want to prove that there's actually value to this. We want to prove that we're going along the right path. But the one thing, so two things I always say to clients is, one thing is everything should really, whether you're doing leadership development, employee development, you're paying for training, I really believe that everything should roll up and be connected to your succession process. So if we're investing in employees, there should be a reason, there should be a direction or a path that we're moving them towards. Not to say that development just for development's sake, that there's not value in it, but I think there's more value to the organization and the employee if we're developing them for something. And I think we're going to get a lot better value out of any money or any resources that we spend. The second piece is the development. I always say development is the engine of succession planning. So we'll talk today really about building out that process and helping you have a structured process in place for your succession. Without kind of an investment in development, you can do the same process a year from now, 5 years from now, and you're probably going to be in the same place. So the idea at a very simple level is we want to go through a process, understand the talent that we need, and really building those success profiles, assessing the talent that we have, and then basically having a plan together so that we can develop and grow the organization. And as I said, because we really believe that development is sort of the engine of succession, it probably doesn't go as a big surprise that we really believe that that development piece is really it is about developing. I hesitate to say everyone because we all have limited resources, but conceptually what we want to do is we want to look at this as an opportunity to bring the skill set of everybody within the organization up, whether they happen to be a successor or not. And I think that there's ways, and we'll talk about them that our clients have done, that we can do that in a cost-effective and sort of resource-effective way. So what I would like you to do first, and hopefully you have a pen and paper with you, but the key piece, as I said, is first understanding focus, right? You might be on here saying, I want to do succession for everybody and I want it done yesterday. That's not realistic. What we always suggest people do is find a focus, find an initial role, and that might be your role. If you're in a leadership position, maybe you have plans to retire soon. So there might be there sometimes is an obvious position, but I still do think that this is a really good exercise. Just to think and put things into context in terms of what is critical role. So first, I want you to think of your organization, and does somebody stand out to you? If I twisted your arm and I said you have to pick one person, who's the person? And in the old days, we used to use the hit by the bus principle. So what would happen if this individual got hit by the bus? It is a rather morbid, and after doing a lot of these sessions and saying it over and over again, we've decided to be a little more lighthearted. And so what would happen if that person won the lottery? I believe that the lottery, I never buy tickets, but I thought I heard it on the news, the lottery was 70 million, whatever our current lottery here in Ontario is. So if that individual won the $70 million and called you or texted you or walked into your office tomorrow and said, I love it here, but I'm done. Who's that person in your mind? And then what I'd like you to do is, if you could just take a kind of a pen and paper, and as I said, you'll have access to this after the session, and you can actually use the spreadsheets. But just because we're on the call here, if you can just basically list, depending on the size of your organization, it might be everyone here, or pick the 10 individuals that you think of that could be the most critical role, and I just want you to write them down on a piece of paper beside you. I'll just give you 60 seconds or so to do that. And as you're doing that, I want you to think of it in terms and essentially score them. Just in terms of, we've put together five categories. Doesn't necessarily have to be this, but we've worked with several organizations, and they tend to be a really good way of saying, because I think if you asked each of the individuals, we all think, everybody on this call, whether we would admit it or not, all think that we're the most critical individual at our organization, right? If we won the lottery tomorrow and we walked out the door, the organization couldn't possibly survive without us. And that may in fact be true. But I think in this context, what we're doing is, where should we initially spend our time? Where should we focus to build this succession planning muscle, and essentially get those skills in place so that we can, ultimately we do want to scale this out more broadly, but let's identify focus. And I also think it's just a good exercise to really contextualize the value that people are bringing. So, hopefully you've listed names here. And first, we'll just talk about urgency. So, for example, the most obvious thing with this is retirement, right? Somebody's been with the organization for 25 or 30 years. They talk about, when I retire. You hear those words over and over again, or you've actually had a conversation with them and they say, okay, December 2022, I'm out. So there's urgency there, and if that is, if we know they're going to retire, then we would score them a 5. The other piece that I think we don't think of enough with succession is, we refer to it as flight risk. So employees, and I would imagine, I'd imagine everyone on this call, like many of our clients, like many industries, especially for top people, it is a seller's market, and people are really struggling with finding new people, retaining the good people that we have. So if you have a sense that somebody's a flight risk, either that they are very marketable, or you kind of get a sense that they're bored or looking for someone else, again, they would get a 5 here. The next piece would be impact, and this is a little bit just in the sense here, it can mean a bunch of different things, but I always use Sharon that works for us. Basically, she has knowledge of our, basically client knowledge that nobody has. She probably has the broadest product and service knowledge of anybody with her organization. She's been with the company the longest, and there's just a great deal of institutional knowledge there. But the other thing is a lot of different processes flow through her just because of her position. And so again, this is really thinking about if they were to win the lottery and they left tomorrow. And I always say no one is irreplaceable, but I want you to think in terms of pain to the organization, in terms of pain in the neck. You look down at your list, which one would have the most impact? And so if it's high impact, it would be a 5. And this doesn't necessarily discount what they do. There just are certain roles and just the nature of that role and how they and how they impact the business. So I wouldn't. It's wrong to say value, because I think everybody offers value and different values. But I think the key piece is the key piece of this is how much sort of flows through them. How painful would it be to have to replace them? So that's impact. The next, is there a role that has specialized skills or knowledge? For example, we have one of our clients, really interesting client, and the client's name is Bob Barker. And I don't know if any of you are similar age to me and you remember Bob Barker from The Price is Right. It is not the same Bob Barker, but it was started by a gentleman named Bob Barker, family-owned company, fairly large, and they actually do, for lack of a better description, they're essentially they're a supplier to federal prisons in the United States. So everything from everything from shoes to toothbrushes to toothpaste, and they and one of their roles, in terms of a specialized skill, they do a lot of their a lot of their supplies, a lot of their supply chain comes from Bangladesh. and they actually have an individual that manages that supply chain that's actually from Bangladesh. And there's very specific cultural cultural needs there. So that's a unique skill that's really difficult to find, and especially where they're at in a small town in North Carolina. So the skills from there are certainly specific concrete skills, but just thinking of some of the unique things that people might offer. So is it a specific skill or knowledge that would be hard to replace? And I always use our example too. We had one of our, in addition to succession planning, we also do different types of assessments, so pre-employment selection, leadership assessments, and so forth. And a lot of the smart people, which doesn't include me at Sigma, the smart people at our organization are all PhDs in industrial organizational psychology. That's a very unique skill set. We deliver all these assessments through a software platform, and basically we had a really bright software developer that had been with the organization for 30 years. Not only were they a great software developer, but they probably had more knowledge of psychological testing than our PhDs. And as you can appreciate, that the combination of those skills was really difficult, and to be honest, we couldn't find it. And what we had to do is really look at what the role was supposed to be instead of what it became. So again, just thinking of, are there specific skills or knowledge that are required for the job that might be hard to replace? And then the next one would be internal talent. So if this person left, do you have somebody in place? Not to say that they would be perfect, but somebody that could step into that role relatively easily. So if there's no internal talent, then that would be a 5. And what we find, and why just a little bit off on a tangent here, is smaller organizations will sometimes tell us we're too small, we don't really need succession. I would argue that it's even more, the smaller you are, that it's more critical, because typically for smaller organizations, that internal talent, either for structural reasons, right, there's only one person kind of in a department, that would be a real challenge. So you do need, I would say, the smaller you are, it can be more important to have a succession plan in place. You just have to be smart about what that process looks like, and making sure that you're not overcomplicating something. And then finally, and I think this is really topical currently, because you could argue that this is going to be high for everyone, but external talent. So, how difficult or easy would it be to hire to replace this person with external talent? And there are some roles. So, for example, we have, and many of our clients have, legal counsel, inside legal counsel in place. And we have an individual. Even our clients, we have one of our clients. They're $3 billion in revenue, tons of employees, but their legal department is one person. So the succession plan, they know that they'll have to go external. But think of roles like that you probably know today. It's going to be tough to promote somebody internally just because of the nature of that role, and not necessarily having the resources or kind of the necessity to have a backup, but how hard is it to bring that person internally or externally? And I'll go back to our software developer. I'm not sure if anyone on the call has software engineers as as employees, but even before the pandemic started, it is extremely difficult. So for example, our lead software developer that I told you about, he gave us 2 years notice for his retirement, and we actually had to negotiate for him to stay around a little bit longer, because it's just incredibly difficult. So again, looking at those roles, looking at it from this criteria, and it's a relatively simple template, right? Just score things, add them up, and basically the highest score is likely where you should focus. What we find as well is sometimes, sometimes you will have ties, you will have 2 or 3 that what this has told you is they're very, they're very critical. I would still decide to focus on one. And, if there's a tie, that it's okay to sort of use the one where, where you can just kind of use your gut and, and see which one is most impactful. But as I said, the idea of this is to essentially, essentially choose one. Who are we going to focus on moving forward, and we'll follow that through through the rest of the session. I'll just stop for a little bit of silence here, see if anybody has any questions on that spreadsheet. So further with those critical roles, you can use the individual that you've identified in that previous worksheet, or it can be your role, whatever makes most sense. But we want to start with, what we call is those linchpin roles, those critical roles that are going to, that really could have an impact on the sustainability of our organization. And there are some folks with that. So, where most folks end up is, somewhere in upper management or leadership positions. I would say, and even on that previous slide, is make sure that it's not just leadership positions, because there's likely some individual contributors that are absolutely linchpin roles, and sometimes we take them for granted a little bit. Essentially take one of those individuals, or it can be you as one of those individuals, and we're just going to go through what we call our at a glance critical roles worksheet. And again, I'll make you, we'll test your artistic skills. I won't make anyone put up their page and show it to the rest of the group. But what we want to do is take a position, and whether it's selected there or one of you on the call want to do your position. So the position, who's in that position now. So if I could get you to just write that at the top of the page. And while this looks, and it is, it is somewhat of an org chart, I don't want you to focus too much on the reporting relationships. What we want to do is essentially, we have a role. We want to essentially take an inventory of all of the individuals, all of the individuals that at least relate to that role somewhat. So it might not be a natural next step. And I always use the example, maybe somebody is 6 months into the organization, either right out of school, relatively new, relatively young in their career. We don't see them certainly anytime soon moving into this role, and let's assume that it's a leadership role. But we would still want them on here because, and I'll show you in a minute when we get to the succession bench, that we want to cast this net broadly and really understand the talent we have. And that's basically people that are ready now, or people that we see with potential that may be ready a little bit more long term. So for if we list those folks, and what I want you to do is think about them in terms of readiness for position, and we are going to be thinking about this position that we identified here. So it's just simply, are they ready 1 to 3 years, which means we think they're in good shape, probably some development opportunities. 3 to 5 would be more medium term, and then 5+. And for the readiness for position, I always get the question, what if they've said they're not interested and they would never want the role? I would still basically list them, and I would still list them and indicate 5+. And the reason for that being is a couple things. Number one, what we want to do is take that broad inventory, and I know it sounds a little institutional, but take that broad inventory of folks, and basically understand all the talent we have. Not really indicate whether they're interested or not. The other piece too is I may not be interested today, or I may have had a conversation with you a year and a half ago, but 5 years from now, my life might be very different. I might be looking for that next opportunity. Maybe my kids have all went to school, and I now have, maybe there's travel involved. as part of the role. And now, now that my kids are gone away to school, I'm okay with travel. So don't assume that just because I've indicated that I don't want it, that we shouldn't still, capture that information. So readiness for position, and think of it in terms of, how long, if you said to them, okay, I want you to take over my role or take over this role that we've identified, how long would it take for them to be in a position to, nobody's ever going to be perfect, but to be in a position to move into that role and be successful in that role. Any questions on readiness? I'll just give a little bit of awkward silence, just in case. The next piece is planning to remain, and I did mention before as well. A lot of times, and actually, what I'll do is I'll go to the next piece here, and that will help. So, for example, the Charlene here is, Perry is going to be leaving in 3 to 5 years. Charlene is ready now, but she's going to be leaving in 3 to 5 years as well. So if we just look at readiness, we think we have this covered. If we look at the fact that Perry and Charlene are probably leaving at the same time, what it tells us is we're not in as good a shape as we thought we were. So it's about looking at everything about that individual when we're taking that inventory. So planning to remain, the most obvious is if they're eligible for retirement, or if they told you that they're going to retire, that's the most obvious. But also just in terms of thinking about flight risk. And this can be on an individual level. Sometimes it's just a feeling that you have. Many of you, and especially in some of the industries that you represent, it's a bit of a. Some of the roles are transitional anyway. So that these certain roles, people only stay within the organization for 3 years or 5 years is kind of the max. And people will flow through those roles. So it can be just the nature of the role that they won't be there for very long, but just understanding, how much confidence do we have that this person's going to be here for a fairly long time. And I think that, that has an impact on what we're willing to invest. I would also say that when we're doing this, if it is flight risk, or if we don't think that they're going to remain just because, there's of what we've done from a retention perspective, I think that's important too, and having a conversation about, what can we do to ensure that you're going to stay, and maybe just identifying that they're at least a candidate might change this planning to remain. So indicate it for those folks. And then last, and something folks don't necessarily think about, is replacement readiness. So I'll go to the next page again. So for Patty here, and let's just assume that she was ready and that this was green. Her replacement readiness is not. So it's great, Perry leaves, we move Patty into Perry's role, but then what we've done is we've actually created, we've created a hole here. So it's the thing with succession is we can't look at it in a vacuum. We have to look at the impact on the org chart, moving down. So, and I always say, typically senior leaders understand succession. They're willing to invest the time and energy into their, in their employees. More middle level management, sometimes, I don't know if pushback is the right word, but we find that there's maybe less buy-in, right? Because I'm busy. They don't really get into it as much. But what you really need to convince your mid-level folks for is, number one, I think if you're in a leadership position, one of your main jobs is to make sure that there's somebody to move into your role, and kind of create a redundancy for your role. But what I always say to these folks back in my coaching days is, if you don't have a successor, and I can tell you this based on all the clients that we work with, it will have an impact on your ability to move into a new role. It just will. If we're trying to decide between Patty and Charlene's replacement is ready, guess who's getting that promotion? Whether it's fair or not. And I've seen it over and over again. So it's not only the right thing to do as a leader, to be developing your replacement, but it's also in your own interest, because without that, it will have an impact on promotions, on your ability to move within the organization. And let's go back to that slide. So yeah, if you can just kind of take that inventory, and I'll show you where that, a little bit later in the session, where that comes in. But again, are they ready just in terms of time, planning to remain, and then is their replacement ready? And that inventory is really helpful just to show. So it's interesting when we do this for clients. We come in, we have them do the workbook. We come back and we will present, essentially this color-coded org chart. And all we're doing is really displaying the information that they've told us. But as you can appreciate, when you see a lot of reds, visually seeing it really helps hit home the importance of succession and really the gap. And what we found is even companies are, our more mature clients, that if we did this for a senior VP, there'd be greens up here. Typically, it's that next level that we're finding in terms of a skills gap. And so the replacement readiness would be red for everyone. And so it's that next level of leadership that really becomes a challenge for folks. So what we've done, and as I said, admittedly, it sounds a little institutional, but we do need to have that inventory and really understand what we have. And initially, it's just if you're doing that as a leader, it's just our opinion, and we'll talk about how we validate that with an objective assessment a little bit later. But the next step here is to build our success profile. So for the role that we're doing succession for, what's important for success? And there's some specific things like if it's somebody in finance, I need to have an accounting degree. There's some basic information, and we can use our job. If you have job descriptions, you can use that to populate some of this. But I think the other thing, and what really supports hiring and really supports developing people towards that role, are competencies. And basically, this is the success profile worksheet that we use. And essentially, sometimes for some clients, we'll do this by levels. So if you see this column here, and I believe that the next one is sort of, this is senior. So anybody in senior leadership, we would have their competencies here, but we're going to focus kind of on the competencies for the role. So this middle column here, and I'll show you a completed one in a minute. The position criteria is where you have, any education, 10 years in hospitality, specific skills, etc. But I think what we find, and we do, as you can appreciate, within succession, we do a lot of work around leadership development and basically getting very bright people to be successful in leadership roles. And what we find is that it really comes down more to competency versus skills. And the other thing too is skills is a lot easier to measure, right? And I'll use kind of your finance department. If you have an accounting degree, you can probably do the work. Does that mean that you can be the CFO and lead an accounting team? Probably not. So what we find is jumping from somebody that does their job really well into a leadership position. It really comes down to competencies. And we'll just, for a little exercise here, and for those of you that that are sick of me already, we'll give you a few minute break here. Is I'd like you to take our competency model, and I don't think there's anything necessary. We love ours because it's ours, and we put some energy into developing it. We've actually categorized them into 4 major categories. So cognitive leadership skills, so kind of that thinking or mental horsepower. Personal leadership qualities, and that's really, for lack of a better description, kind of the motivation, ambition, and then the interpersonal piece that's really going to be how you interact with others, and then senior leadership skills. So if I could have you take a few minutes and think of your role, and I'm going to force you, because you can make an argument, we put a lot into work, that all of these are important, but I'd like you to think of, and this is across all 4 categories, 5 competencies out of this large list that you think are absolutely critical for your role. If you can go through and just pick 5. So what are the 5 competencies? If I were to move into your role and they're not a strength of mine, I am going to struggle. And I'll just give you a few minutes to think about that and digest that, and give some thought and write those down. And if anybody would like to share the 5 competencies that they chose, that would be nice. And I'm sure the rest of the folks on the call would love to hear another voice. I'll take the I'll take the silence as a no, but certainly as we go through this, feel free to jump on. And the idea of that, and we would, obviously we would go through a little bit more of a detailed process when we work with clients, but I think the key piece is again, starting with something. So I'll show you essentially a sample of a success profile that we've done. These are what we found are important for really, if you're in a senior management position, regardless of what your role, these are really important. These were specific for an SVP of HR that we worked with in terms of what competencies are important. And then the position criteria, as I said, that's something that you can bring from a job description, etc. But what we find, it's interesting, the one thing when we do this process, and probably no shock on that senior management role, the one thing, regardless of the industry, regardless of the client, the size, whether they're a public and private sector, integrity always comes up as number 1. And sort of that, that trust and your team believing that you have that as you. So I don't know that it comes as any surprise to anyone, but that's something that comes up, comes up at the top of the list every single client that we work with. But on the, on the current competencies, you notice what we find as well is really the, and I'll just go to the previous slide here. The things that we find are the biggest challenge when someone moves from an individual role where, they're doing their job, yes, they're interacting to people, to actually managing people, is really this category here. So the interpersonal leadership skills, the kind of communication, conflict management, things like that. Those are, and what we find from a leadership perspective, just in terms of, as an aside, from an employee retention perspective, there's, and I'm probably butchering the quote a little bit, but there's a quote that says, people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. And what we find is the biggest sort of derailer, the biggest thing that pushes people out of an organization are where where these interpersonal skills, where a leader is lacking in those, and it really creates some some interesting, I'll put in quotes, dynamics that essentially essentially force people out. I always, and this is an extreme example, but I always tell the story back when I did executive coaching, and I was coaching an executive, very successful. They had some challenges, and his leader, they worked in a high rise, and were on the 35th floor. And these are all, successful, successful executives. These are all successful executives, mid-career, late 40s, early 50s, and this leader would actually, if you were, in trouble, if the leader was not happy with you, he'd actually make you take the elevator to the bottom floor and wait outside for 15 minutes. And it's probably no surprise to anybody on the call that they had a really serious problem with retaining quality employees. Surprising that adults don't like to be treated like children, but it's such an absurd story, and it actually happened that I always tell it. So, and just a question here, and bear with me as I read it. The profiling, profiling can be subjective. Is it possible for a poor leader to put a succession plan together where they actually plan for a better leader than themselves? And that's a really good example. So, I am a poor leader. I'm actually doing the doing the profile. What we do, and it's a good question, because what we do when we work with clients is, I do think it's important when we do this exercise and we do workshops like this, just the nature of it, we have you build your own success profile. What we actually do in the real world is we would capture perspectives from others, and we will also use assessments to build that. So I think that it's possible, but if the leader is doing this in a silo and on their own, because what we find is poor leaders are typically not very self-aware. So if the leader is self-aware, I think they can, and they understand where their strengths and development, specifically their development opportunities are. What we find is there is there is a pretty high correlation between poor leaders and that lack of self-awareness. So I don't think that they would be aware of that, and that's why we bring in other perspectives to build the success profile. And if you are, and I'm sure if we have leaders on this call, I'm sure you're all fantastic leaders. I would still, when we do, when we have our success profile, I would talk to your team, and I would say, I would position it as, these are the things that I think are important to be successful in my role. From your perspective, how do these things impact you? Are there competencies missing? Would you like to, is there something that you'd like to add here? So I do think it's a great question. I do think getting other perspectives is really important. The incumbent, the incumbent probably has the best knowledge, but I think it's a good example, whether they're a bad leader or not. Sometimes you don't necessarily even know what you know. So involving those other perspectives, I think, can be really, really critical. So thank you for the question. So next, what we've done up to this point, right, is we've taken a quick inventory in terms of the talent we have, but relatively subjective. We've built a success profile for what we need, and now is the opportunities to we call it nominate succession candidates, and it is a little bit misleading in the sense that if you read this, you think, okay, we're just looking for who's next. And this is really about adding another layer to that inventory. We want to do this for all individuals that could potentially, so anybody that we've indicated on that org chart. And essentially, we want to keep this relatively simple. And we call it readiness that we've already done, so it should align with that org chart that we did. But also confidence, right? How confident are we? Kind of confidence and readiness. So we would do this for everyone, and I would recommend that this is another one where we have different perspectives. And the person's immediate leader would do this for their team, and then that leader should look for other perspectives and look at ways to validate that. The reason for this, and the other reason why, and I'll talk about kind of layering on some objective measure, is we all have bias, right? And the really neat thing when we work with clients, and I would say the most rewarding thing, is when we're going through a process, and through working with a client, we're able to identify someone that maybe was seen, as a good employee, but not somebody we saw as a high potential or really be in a position to move up within the organization. And through the work, and we've kind of identified a blind spot and really saw somebody that was a good employee, but maybe has blended into the background over the years. So I do think we want to look for opportunities to capture other perspectives and give. Succession can be really opportunity to shine a light on some good employees that for many different reasons may have, and I always say, kind of blend into the background. Or as a leader, and I think we're everybody in this call has probably been guilty of it at one point in time, is and certainly early on in my career, I would have an employee that maybe didn't step up to a challenge, or maybe had a few had a few difficulties in terms of projects that I had them on, and then that person is kind of labeled for their career, for the rest of their career. And I think that we put them in a box, and that might be accurate, but what we find more than not is that this process can be a really great opportunity, because what we're doing is not only finding out who's next, but we're looking, once we have our success profiles, once we go through a process of really understanding the talent that we have, is it gives us a unique opportunity to inform where will people perform the best. And you know, and I might be a little bit, I might be a little bit over optimistic, but I do believe, and if we think of, you know, we think of the folks that are working for you, you can probably tell me now, you know, who are your superstars, who are your, you know, good employees, and who are the folks that you actually wish would walk into your office and say, I'm leaving. And I believe that poor employees are just employees that we haven't found a good fit for. And that good fit may not be at our organization, but one of the nice things about Succession is it gives you the information where you can actually, for lack of a better description, look for those matches, and you know, and look for opportunities for people to excel. And I think the large, I think it's an exception. I think a bad employee is an exception more than a rule, and I think it's just a matter of they haven't found their right spot. And as I said, that might be at the organization, that might not, but I really believe that as when we're looking at kind of as people developers, always trying to find, you know, always trying to put people in the best position to succeed. And I think both that's, you know, it's a nice thing to do. But I also think it's the best. It's in the best interest of the individual, but also more broadly the organization, right? I mean, think, and I don't know that this ever happens, but we're working towards a spot where everybody feels, you know, everybody is engaged and actually doing something that really gets them jazzed. Imagine the impact on the organization. Imagine the impact on any of the, you know, if we're in a customer-facing environment. Imagine how much nicer they are to clients or customers. You know, that sort of thing. And I was, and I always kind of tell the story of we traveled to, my daughter is going to West Virginia on a golf scholarship. We went down to see, about a month ago, we went down to see the campus. We had to get our COVID test to come back to cross the border. And even though it was supposed to be ready, it was not. So we were stuck in Port Huron, Michigan. And you know, it wasn't a good situation. We weren't really thrilled, but we walked into it was a Hampton Inn in Port Huron, and I don't know what it was. You know, I wish there were a client, but basically every individual at that hotel was over the top engaged, really loved what they do, and it quickly turned, not only, you know, turned a bad experience into something good. And I've always been a Hilton. I travel a lot. But it just, like I told probably 50 different people about that experience. So, you know, it's a really small example of when your employees are engaged, and especially when you're customer facing, that will absolutely be reflected in their interactions with your clients. And it's, you know, that's something that's really, you know, really difficult to train, but it's about finding ways to have them engaged. And I think that, you know, I think that Succession is a great way of doing that. Finding, you know, and what it does is there's no magic to it, but what we do is we end up with, you know, we end up with an opportunity to have discussions with people. We end up with an objective way to view the talent we have, and really information that can help us try things, right? Doesn't mean that it's not going to be perfect, but it helps us try different things and really, again, put people in positions to succeed and put people in positions to express the things that they're good at. So just more of an aside, but as I said, you know, throughout this, you probably get the sense of, we really believe Succession is really about more than finding who's next. So an alternative to, yep. So,
oh, sorry, can I just pop in for a second with a couple of questions that I've been sent? Is it a guess when others plan to leave? I don't think my employees would tell me this up front. And then the next one is, all too often we see people promoted who have no leadership management skills. How much weight should be put on this skill set if the successor is weak in this area but very strong in others?
Yeah, so you know, two good questions. I think in terms of when people will leave, that is a tough one, right? Because even if you ask me directly, I'm probably, I don't know that it's a great career move to tell you, yes, my resume is in tip-top condition and I've applied to 5 jobs in the last week and a half. So that one is a little bit more on gut. And I think that when we go into we'll go into the succession bench, and I think that there's some things that I'll talk about there, but it's really about, for lack of a better description, it's really about keeping your ear to the ground, right? And trying to pick up on subtleties. And it is a little bit more detective work than a hard and fast binary thing. But I also think that one of the things that should come from succession is consistent discussions with an employee around, how do we make sure that you're engaged and happier? And I think that those will come out, maybe not overtly and directly, but you will get a sense based on those discussions. So it's about having dialogue. And then the second question is, sort of the lack of leadership skills. And that's a really good question. And I'd say most people, so there's 2 pieces of that. It's probably safe if you're looking at a pure safety thing, right? If I'm looking at 2 people, identical skill sets, identical backgrounds, one has been a manager before, one is not. Pretty, the safe decision is that manager. What we find though in the clients that we work with is it's rarely that simple, right? So so the one thing is, I think the nice thing about what we're going through, just in terms of understanding what that talent is, if if you say, hey, I just don't have any management experience, that's really difficult to put a person in a position and somehow set them up for success. But if you can say, and that's why when we talk about competencies, why competencies are so important, if you can say, these are, I have a challenge with conflict management, and sort of managing, and sort of managing teams. That's something that we can work with. So kind of a roundabout way of saying, yes, the safest thing is somebody with management experience, but I would say if we have a way to quantify, if we have a way to measure what those challenges are, then we actually have, that person can enter into a management role with, with the development plan in place that we'll talk about in a minute. So I don't, the other piece though too is, if you're an organization and the only way I can move, so this is just a practical piece, if you're an organization and I see, okay, every time there's a new management role, we go external and you bring somebody in that's been a manager already. Before long, your good people are going to say, well, I'm not getting any management experience here, and I will never be a manager until I have management experience, and they will leave, right? So the safest thing is absolutely to lean on the people with management experience. I would say it's not in the long-term best interest of the organization to use that as the only, as the only criteria. So, but it's about being very mindful and planful, putting that person in a position of success and understanding what it is that they need. Don't just throw them to the wolves, but make sure that you know what their challenges are going to be, and give them development opportunities to move them to that role. So hopefully that answers the question. Any follow-ups on that? 2 really good questions, by the way.
I think we're good. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. And then this is just, I'm not looking at my watch because I have any other place to be, just making sure to keep everybody, to be sensitive to everyone's time here. This is just another tool to sort of get a sense of, because the other thing is too, is I think some of the smaller organizations that we work with don't necessarily have that, that necessarily kind of clear structural piece where, these people are going to be successors for this role, etc. I also think another approach, because as I said, succession to us is about developing, the organizational knowledge and skills. So trying to bring that water level up for everyone. This is another great tool just in terms of listing your individual and identifying. We use it in our high potential programs. and kind of identifying the folks that you want to spend some initial time developing. You may not know that there's a, there may not be a specific position ready for them, but you want to put them, you want to make sure that they're engaged and you're developing so that they're ready, and it might be any number of positions. So very similar tool to the critical roles, but what we do is we just look at the individuals, that clearly, they need to be a strong performer. And this is something, what we do is we actually use it to identify folks that we're going to invest in to move them into leadership positions. So the things that we're looking for are, do they take initiative? Are they self-starters? Do they take feedback well and grow? How are they with the relationships, and just kind of, do they understand the strategic alignment? So this is sort of a way, relatively quick, but I think still a really powerful tool to identify kind of who are going to be in the best position to succeed in a leadership role without necessarily kind of defining it to a specific role within the organization. So I won't go into too much of that, but it's another really good tool just to have a systematic way of trying to take some of your bias out of your decisions and just thinking structurally about who we're going to focus on and who we should spend some energy on. So a lot of the work that we've done, and I think that we've put together a relatively simple process. I also am a realist and know, with the multiple demands that you have, I always like to say, if you take nothing from this, what's the simplest, what's kind of the thing that's going to have the biggest impact, and at least start moving you down that path towards succession without having to kind of bite off the whole succession cookie, so to speak. The work that we've done this far is really to populate the succession bench. And really, you'll see the main driver here is kind of the readiness that we've indicated on two separate tools. But the key piece, why I really like this tool, it's one page. It really is a great 60,000 view of the talent that you have. And just as an aside, one of the things when we talk about, and we can also measure, do people stay in level C? So I've indicated Patty will be ready in 5 years. 5 years from now, is she still down here? Has she not moved up? That tells me something. But I also say one of the best ways to identify when somebody is a flight risk is if they've been level A and then they've moved down this list. So part of it is, and I always say, if you take nothing else from this session, I mean, it's 90 minutes. So the one thing that I'd love to take, if nothing else, take this succession bench, essentially do an inventory of your team and indicate, what level you think they're in, and then track it. So basically, if Otis moves into level A, we move them up into level A, and we indicate when they moved. The other piece as well is we can also track their current position and their next position. Likely, especially the folks in level C, likely are not going to be senior VP in HR, but is there a next role for them? And as I said, it's a one pager. It's relatively simple to maintain, but I would say if you take this and you just say, I am going to, for the next year, I am going to look at this, make changes to it, discuss this, with the other leaders on a quarterly basis. If you just did that, and you'd be ahead of a significant number of organizations from a succession perspective. And the idea is visibility in terms of what your talent looks like, and making sure that those talent discussions are happening on a frequent basis. So the succession bench is really another way of illustrating that org chart that we talked about, but this is the thing. And with our clients, so we work with them and we do accountability workshops, and every leader needs to bring their succession bench, and we discuss where people are at. If they're not moving, what are the challenges to them actually becoming more ready? And it's a great way to identify if people are progressing or they're regressing. And it's also a great way to just make sure that your talent is under a spotlight consistently. Any questions on the bench? So once we have that bench, as I said, the profile is the talent we need. The bench is a really great 60,000 foot view of the talent we have. So basically, now what? And the idea is we need to, I'll just go back here. The idea is we've done that foundation work. Now actually the work starts. So big deal, we have people in A, B, or C. If we don't do anything, I think we all on the call know that it's going to look exactly the same in a year and 5 years. The key piece is how do we get to a point where people are consistently moving up the ladder, so to speak. This is a pretty good succession bench because at least we have two options. From a best practice perspective, a mature organization, and there's very few of them, would have basically 3 people in level A. So with the ideal, and for some of you smaller organizations, that's just not a reality, just a sheer numbers game. But so that you have basically options anytime a position is open. But the key piece here is it's about, and what I would say again, focus is important. So if we're looking at our succession bench, what I want you to do is look at that succession bench and say, okay, I want to pick one person, and that could be maybe Perry is leaving soon and it makes sense to spend our time on level A. Maybe the urgency is not very high and we actually want to spend our time on level C, but pick one individual that you want to go through a process and as I said, build that muscle so that you're doing something to impact their development. So we'll take Patty in this case, let's say, because we have some runway. Let's ignore this and let's just say Perry's going to be here for a while. So it makes sense to pick somebody in level C and see if we can, see if we can grow them, and at least move them into level B. So what we do is we want to have a succession profile worksheet for them. And I'll just flip through here. And the idea is to essentially have a candidate profile. The position that they're a successor for, Charlene is the actual candidate. All this stuff is more demographic. The focal role, understand how they match up in terms of the criteria, and that was that left-hand column of the success profile. But the key piece and what I'd like you to focus on really is the gap. So where are their strengths? Where are their development opportunities? And this is what's going to drive our development. This is the engine that's going to put Charlene in a position where she can move into the senior VP role. So it's a snapshot of the profile. Then we get into development planning, and you'll see we have the development, basically her top development areas. Talking with the group about or talking with the individual about some medium, short, and long-term goals. And as I said, I don't know how many of you have. I know historically a lot of our clients would do their individual development plan. It was 17 pages long. Nobody liked to do it. They do it and they never looked at that again. We're big believers. We really love kind of one-pagers that have the snapshot, because what this is, there's no magic in this tool. This is really to support discussions with your employee. Are you aware of those development areas? Let's talk about what we can do to grow those development areas, and then let's come back together and see how we're doing. Okay, so the development, and this is certainly this is certainly something that you've probably seen or probably been through sessions before. But so there's nothing necessarily magical about this. But what I would say is, maybe you're doing this already with employees, but if you're not, at a minimum, select one individual, kind of have a discussion with them and really identify some areas to develop, and really work with them through that. So building the muscle for yourself as a leader, building the muscle for them you know, as an individual, so that you're growing people. And again, the main focus of this in this context is we want to build them, we want to really close that gaps so that they can be in a really strong position to move into the succession position. But also you can appreciate those discussions are going to identify if they're a flight risk. Those discussions are going to hopefully identify areas where they can be engaged. And really this becomes, you know, this becomes a retention tool as well. And oh, by the way, you know, you're retaining people and you're growing people so that you do have choice for those linchpin roles. And then, so finally here, the talent progress scorecard. So one of the things in our industry, kind of the talent and development industry, I don't think is done very well. Even, you know, even folks that we work with that are really invested and really believe in what they're doing, I think you have to be able to prove the value, right? Because as I said, we've tried to make this as simple as possible, but this does not take zero time. And if you're going to be spending the time, there has to be something in it for the organization. There has to be something in it for you. So it's really about, and these are just some thoughts and some of the things that we've looked. And what I would say is, find at least one thing, but ideally 2 or 3 things that you can measure easily. Because if it's a big pain to measure, if it has to be a project for somebody, you're not going to measure it. But just you know, and just some ideas here. Critical positions filled internally. So you know, how often are you able to promote internally? So critical positions, management positions. How long are people in the same role? And as I said, for some of you, that might just be a function of not, you know, there's just not a lot of room to move. And then that's a case where I think you look at maybe not a title, but maybe giving the individual different projects or different responsibilities. And as I said, the big one for our larger clients is how many of their critical positions have 3+ candidates. And then kind of the average, you know, if we take our high potentials, those average years ready. And then, so again, you don't have to do all these. I would look and say, what can we easily measure, or what do we always measure? And then just make sure to look at that and track that and be able to connect that to your efforts on the talent side. Because without that, it's hard to get budget, it's hard to get people's time, and it's hard to get buy-in. So really look for ways to close the loop and say, yeah, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, but this is the actual impact that it has on the organization. And I always say, so for example, let's just say critical positions filled internally, we went, you know, it was 52%, we've increased it by 12%. And what I would say, whenever possible, turn that into a dollar figure. So if we've had to go externally, you know, 10% less than we did, you know, 10% less than we did a year ago, what does that mean? So how much less did it cost us to post positions, to train that person, all that kind of stuff. So whenever you can, also convert this into a dollar figure and close that loop and communicate that to your stakeholders. I think that will that goes a long way in helping get a buy-in. Any questions on that, or on the development piece? So just to summarize things, I know it's kind of a lot of information, and as I said, this will be available through the you know, through that resource that we'll be sending out to everyone. But just a quick little overview. I mean, to kind of get the most, as I said, that really complete support from the CEO. They should be involved in the process, align it with where the organization is going long term. The transparent communication, right? So, and this is one, and it didn't come up in the session, but people always ask, right, how do I tell people? And we're not big believers in saying, hey, by the way, you've been selected to move into the, you know, to move into this role. That conversation never happens until the countdown clock starts. So until the person in that role has said, I'm retiring in 6 months, that never happens. Really, we position succession planning as a development opportunity for a broader group, for everyone. This is not about finding who's next. And the reasons for that is just because I'm the right candidate today doesn't mean that I'm going to be 2 years from now or 5 years from now. So the communication is just about why are we doing it? Kind of what's in it for me as an employee, and what our commitment as the organization to that employee is going to be. So that transparent, and then finally just a simple process. So we've went through, and as I said, we call it simple succession planning. I would always, as much as we've invested in this and we really like the process that we put together, look at it and say, okay, are there things that I can take from this that I can do, that I can start doing this afternoon or tomorrow? And I would say really focus, as a suggestion, that succession bench, I think, is a really good piece. But look for things that you can take from it. It doesn't have to be the entire process, but look for things that you can take from it and start doing now. And then once you're comfortable with that, layer that on as you build out the process. You don't have to go 0 to 60 overnight. It's about moving closer to where you want to be and taking those small bites and building building the case for it as you move along. So just because this is what you need to find what works best for your organization. And then kind of some recommendations. Review those org charts. And look for where the areas, so where are our biggest gaps? Where do we see really, the potential risk if people were to leave? And that's going to help us identify high areas of needs and really focus on those areas first. Building those success profiles, I think, is a good exercise anyway. I think you should really understand what's important for success in all of those linchpin roles, whether you care about succession or not. I think that's going to help you, as I said, develop people towards those roles. It's going to help you evaluate how good the incumbents are in those roles. And I think it also helps you recruit if you have to go external. And the big piece, the big one here, and why we have it in bold, is regularly review and discuss that succession bench. So as I said, if you take nothing from this, populate that succession bench and discuss it with your colleagues and make sure talent is always at the top of the list, at least on a quarterly basis that you're talking about it, and make sure that it's, give it the importance that it deserves. Because what we do a lot of times is a lot of times we get called in when when an organization has lost 3 of their senior executives in a matter of a month. And we can always help, but it's a heck of a lot less painful if we're proactive about that. And then finally, as I said, as employees, as we're investing in that development, make sure that we measure their progress and make sure that we continue to reassess their readiness to move into the role and have those discussions with them. And I think that's, again, the idea is look for ways that you can weave this through your day-to-day and not just make it this big project that we build up to and then we never do anything about it. And if there are no questions, and this is what we do for our clients, and I'll spend all of 1 second on this. Our succession planning launch series that we do for clients is we actually come in. It's 2 half-day sessions. We go through our process and essentially build the success profile for them. So certainly, if there's something that you're interested, please feel free to reach out. All of our resources, if you go to sigmaleader.com, we have an amazing amount, so you'll be able to download the succession guide that we talked about. There's individual resources we have some great resources for all of the competencies that you have listed, and they're all free to download. There's just a tremendous amount of free resources out there. We're a big believer in delivering value to our clients out there and having it out there for free. So there's a great deal of resources. Feel free to go to that website, and I think you'll find a lot of great resources that will help you, that will help you as you move forward with this. And then certainly, if you have any questions or certainly anything that we can do, please feel free to reach out with an email or a call. We're always happy to help. And what I always say too is, I think sometimes folks are afraid to reach out, because as soon as you reach out, then we, then we go into the hard sell mode and call you 17 times a day and wonder when you're going to do business with us. That has never been our approach at Sigma, and I think we display that with the amount of free information that we do. We're always here to help, whether that discussion turns into business or not. We love the dialogue because it helps us actually do our job better. So on that note, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. And as I said, any questions, we're always here to help.
Thank you, Glenn, and we can definitely stay on for a few more minutes if anyone does have any questions. The session is being recorded and will be posted on RTO9's YouTube channel if you want to review it again. And we will be taking some of this information and putting it into a toolkit that's being developed right now as well. But I'm happy to hear that a lot of this good stuff is available on your website, Glenn. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so if anybody has questions, just feel free to speak up. If not, we'll wrap it up for the day. Just checking the chat. And I don't see anything in the chat or the questions. So, okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, thank you, Glenn, for a great presentation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.